Humor me for a moment and imagine this scenario. You show up to school in your first years of teaching, and you walk into your classroom, except you'd hardly call it a classroom. The walls are made out of mud clay, and the roof is just a bunch of sticks bundled together. There are no desks, but there is one bench sitting on the dirt floor in the middle of the hut. Against one wall, there is an old chalkboard with a few nubs of chalk on the ground beneath it, and to the left of that is a bookshelf with outdated materials that will be one of your sole resources for the next 4 to 6 months. The only light source is from a hole in the wall that's posing as a window. And now, if this is a little too uncomfortable, take into account this scenario. You show up to school on time about a half an hour early, like any good teacher should, but as you walk into your classroom, half of your students are already at their desks, seated and ready to go. They sit there chatting amongst themselves in their pressed, wrinkled-free uniforms. Looking around, you see kids of different ethnicities and backgrounds, and you even hear different languages being spoken. Now, both of these scenarios I just described may seem like foreign concepts, and frankly, that's because they are. I'm talking about teaching internationally. This topic is so interesting to me because after I graduate, I would love to jump right into teaching in an international setting. I don't have thorough experience with varied cultures though, so through this project, I would like to find out some of the need-to-know information about teaching internationally, how the international classroom is influenced, and lastly, the steps that I can take to respond well to my students and the different cultures that they bring to my classroom. Coming into this project, I had very little prior knowledge, so obviously that led to me having some big questions like, do I need specific qualifications to teach in an international school? What are some of the logistics like housing, pay, and travel? What will I teach? Where do I start? And how will I respond to the different cultures that I will encounter in my classes? In order to find these answers, I turned to two primary sources: articles, web pages, and studies I found online, and I interviewed a former classmate of mine back in Sheridan who had the opportunity to teach abroad in Vietnam. Looking into the question of whether or not I need special qualifications, I found that many schools prefer hiring teachers with at least 2 years of relevant teaching experience in the United States. However, many international schools will hire new college graduates with the right qualifications. New teachers who are flexible about geographic location, have strong academic background, and are committed to the strong principles of teaching and learning are great candidates. Some key characteristics of a strong applicant wanting to teach internationally include
Flexibility.
a sense of humor, love for young people, creativity, and strong communication skills. Now, let's get down to business. What are some of the logistics of teaching internationally? Concerning location, according to the National Association of Independent Schools, nearly every capital city in the world plays host to an international school. They boast outstanding facilities, diverse student bodies, and extremely competitive salaries and benefits for teachers. Most international teachers can also expect to make what they might at a private school here in the United States, but over there, it will be tax-free. Also, many international schools provide teachers with furnished housing, round-trip airfare at the beginning and end of a contract, and medical coverage. Now, as a teacher, I'm going to be there to teach, so that begs the question, what will I teach? And I found this depends largely on the kind of school that I'll find myself in. Some schools will hire American teachers as English as a second language instructors, while others base their school structure off of the American school system and classrooms mimic those found in the U.S. The National Association of Independent Schools reports the curricula in these schools vary, reflecting the specific needs of individual school enrollments, but one usually finds a very typical U.S. public school curriculum. Through my research, I found that there are many outlets to begin exploring when searching for a teaching job. One of the best places to start, though, is in job fairs here in the United States. Annually, there are ones that can be found on both the East and West Coast. There's also a major job fair that the University of Northern Iowa puts on. Now that we have most of the logistics covered, we can begin looking into the cultural aspect of teaching within an international school. International schools are incredibly diverse based on nationality. Some schools can represent up to 50 different countries. However, in an international school setting, the socioeconomic status of some of the students is not as diverse. Most students will fall within the upper to middle to upper class label because of their families can afford the expensive tuition of an international school. With these factors being taken into account, I looked more into the idea of diversity within the classroom. In an article posted on the Journal of Research for International Education, different models for international education were presented and explored. Thompson's Model of a Learning Environment for International Education highlights the importance of cultural diversity. It takes into account what groups affect the school environment. The box is the idea of diversity, and everything in it is what contributes to that diversity. Another modified model presents the cube unfolded, emphasizing the sides of a cultural diversity that students and teachers bring and their distinct differences. The last revision of the model makes the biggest change in Section 4, where it stresses the importance of diversity contributed to by the communities in which the international school is found. This re-emphasized with the circle graph breaking down the fundamental pieces of each level of influence. This study was insightful because it provided me with the context of understanding where the diverse culture within an international school really comes from. And to get an even better idea of how a different culture is experienced in a school setting, I conducted an interview with one of my former classmates, Evan Tucker, who had the opportunity to teach in an English language institute in Vietnam. I was able to get an inside scoop on his experience in teaching internationally. Hey Evan, thank you for agreeing to answer some of my questions.
Yeah, no problem.
Alright, so we'll get started. How did you even hear about or pursue the opportunity to teach in Vietnam?
I knew that I wanted to travel after I graduated from high school, and I met a friend of a friend who lived in Vietnam and was visiting his family in California. I told him I'd like to travel, and he told me that he would help me come to Vietnam. I took him up on the offer.
Very cool. What did you teach while you were there?
I taught English as a second language. My primary purpose where I worked was to provide immersion for Vietnamese students to utilize the English language skills they had learned from their native teachers.
Awesome. Now, how were logistics like housing, curriculum, and pay addressed?
I was given an hourly rate of pay that was agreed upon prior to me being hired. Raises and bonuses were given based on my performance at my employer's discretion. The English center I worked for owned an apartment that they had their foreign teachers live in. Curriculum was based on what students had been learning from their native teachers. I would often be emailed some materials by the teachers prior to me teaching their class and use them in my lessons. Other times, teachers would just give me a topic to discuss with the students, but those lessons were typically with more advanced students.
Now, was it difficult being sensitive to the Vietnamese culture while inevitably exposing your students to aspects of American culture?
There were aspects of Vietnamese culture that I did rub up against. Two specific things being the propagation of patriarchy by men and the limitation of free speech by the government. I never told students that anything was good or bad. I approached all of my cultural lessons from an academic standpoint and informed students about cultural differences, rather than trying to influence their beliefs. All of my students were young enough to be accepting and understanding of the cultural differences, and American culture is viewed in a mostly positive light in Vietnam, so I never had any issues with students in that regard.
Cool. Now, what was one of the most difficult aspects of your time there?
Communication was the most difficult for a variety of reasons. Not only were my interactions with locals and my coworkers influenced by the language, but cultural differences were caused difficulties in multiple occasions. For example, I had to speak with the principal of one of the 3 centers I worked at through a translator, usually one of the native teachers, because she did not speak English. She was an old-fashioned Vietnamese teacher who wanted her students doing rote memorization and repetition, while I saw more value in engaging with me and using their English in a non-academic context. I had to get my boss involved to resolve that conflict, and the principal was told to give me more freedom in my classroom.
Now, what was the highlight from your experience?
The highlight of my experience is the people. I was always welcome and treated well by the people in Vietnam, and I still keep in touch with some of my old coworkers. My students are some of the smartest kids I've ever encountered, and I made a lot of friends, both in and out of work, that supported me in uncountable ways while I was there. I would not have enjoyed the experience anywhere near as much if not for them.
Awesome, Evan. Thank you so much for answering some of my questions.
Thanks for having me.
So, in conclusion, I've learned the logistics of teaching abroad, what shapes the classroom culture, and I've gained insight from a friend's first-hand experience. By preparing myself to teach in an international setting through projects like this, I will be able to better recognize the cultures that my students come from, permitting me to respond to them as Jesus responded to those outside of his culture. And understanding leads to acceptance. Acceptance leads to civility, and that ultimately leads to love. This project addressed objectives 4 and 5 because I was able to recognize the learners from all different backgrounds within my international classroom. I dove even deeper into seeing what other influences will affect culture and cultures in my class. I will be able to access information on different cultures through resources that the school provides for me, and by reaching out to those that have had experience teaching abroad, as I did with my friend Evan. Discovering what I now know through this project, I am better equipped to pursue my goals of teaching internationally. Even the limited insight and perspective opportunities like this provide can better prepare me for life after Dordt. So, overall, through an interview with an old friend and extensive research on my own, I have learned the basics regarding some of the logistics in teaching abroad and received an understanding of what influences culture in an international school setting, allowing me to formulate a better plan as to how I may pursue teaching in a culturally responsive way within the international classroom. Thanks.